He's here basically to build educational courseware and do other things like that. And he's around all year. There's a lot of different projects going on. There's plenty of opportunities for volunteers to get involved. So if you're looking for ideas on things to work on, you can always come and find him. I'm sure he'll be a source of interesting ideas. Okay, are we moving?
I'm sort of getting the laptop going here. I'm going to type xrandr -- output VGA 0 -- auto, and if we're lucky, we should get a signal here. Okay, cool. So first calibrating question: if you think that 2 + 2 is 4, please raise your hand. Raise them high. I need to see them very high. Okay, so when I ask questions, I need to see very high hands. Okay. If you don't think that 2 + 2 is 4, raise your hands. Okay, all right, good. Okay, so we know how to raise our hands very high, and we know how to not raise our hands. That's good. Okay, so I'll ask an actual question now. So this is Linux. Raise your hand if you use Linux. Okay, so we see probably about 10 hands or so. I've been using Linux pretty much continuously since 2004 or so. It's what I use on the desktop and what I use in lots of other parts of my life. Raise your hand if you have a phone that runs Android. If you have a phone that runs Android, raise your hands. Okay, so we've got another about 10 or so people. Now let's take the union of those two sets. If you use Linux and/or have a phone that runs Android, raise your hand. This is a computer science idea. We have to combine those two sets. Raise your hand if you use Linux or have a phone with Android. Okay, so a few of us. So now let's raise our hand if we knew. So if you know that Android is actually a form of Linux, now raise your hand. Okay, so in fact, anybody who's using Android is really using Linux in disguise. That's pretty cool. Let's raise your hand if you've looked at a website in the last year. Okay, so that's more of us. Raise your hand if you knew that 80% of websites run on servers that run Linux. A few of us, okay. So it seems like if you use Linux on the desktop, you use Linux. If you have a phone that runs Android, you use Linux. If you look at websites more than, say, 1 or 2 of them, you're probably using Linux somewhere in that website backend. So let's have one more time. Raise your hand if somewhere in your life you've used Linux. Okay, cool. So that's good. So I'm a mathematician by trade, and that's kind of what I'm here to do in Kenya, but I use a lot of computer stuff as well. So I developed for an open source computer algebra system called Sage, and I've been working with that for quite a while. And I'm something of a proponent of open source stuff, and I want to sort of emphasize that because we're going to hear a lot about the commercial creation of mobile tools, and I think that's a really good thing. But I think it's also really important not to forget to build free tools as well. And there's a lot of really good reasons for that. And to sort of get at that, I think I want to tell you about a project I was working on recently. So about a month ago or so, we had this math camp for high school students. And we brought in lots and lots of high school students into Maseno, about 130 of them, and spent a week with them doing fun, cool stuff. And one of the things we had them do was write journal entries on paper every day. And a bunch of them would turn in the journal entries, and then we would photograph them, and they'd look like this. Oh, that doesn't look very good, does it? So let's see if I can get that into a place where you can see it. We want that over here, and then we can do up. Sorry about that, sort of losing the window here. Yeah, so maybe they look something like this. So here's a journal entry that we photographed. And what I wanted to do was share these journal entries with anybody who might be interested in the math camp. So I said, okay, well, now we've got all of these paper journal entries and I want to get them on the web. How am I going to do that? Well, I built a little bit of software that would do what I want. And so we took all of these photographs. This particular photograph is one of the originals, and it runs about 6 megabytes. And I wrote a single line of code here, which, looks something like this. And what it does is it takes that photograph and resizes it and turns it into something that looks like this. And you might say, but Tom, that looks exactly the same, and that's kind of the point. But that original file was 6 megabytes, and this one is more like 70K, and it's also automatically sort of cropped off the sides and all of that stuff that we're not interested in. And then I wrote a second piece of software that takes those pictures, goes through all of them, and then uses this really cool thing called XML-RPC, and puts it on and then it automatically uploads it to this website. And the website is a WordPress blog, and it sort of just puts them all up, creates a nice big entry for me, and it's really beautiful. Now everybody can see these students' pictures on the web. And instead of manually uploading them one at a time, I have a program that I've written that can do all of this for me. And it was pretty cool and worked pretty well. But the really important part is that it used free tools to get there. So about halfway through the week, I'm working on putting this together, and the tool that I've downloaded to do this isn't quite working, and so I go online and find the guy that wrote it. His name is Max. He's an undergraduate at Yale, and I wrote him an email, and we started having some 3 a.m. email exchanges to talk about how to get things working, and indeed it worked out in the end, and everybody's happy. But Max has created this free tool that is XML-RPC that takes whatever you want, and you can then use it to upload stuff to WordPress. And that's really cool. It's a really nice free tool, and now I know this guy Max because it was out there for free, and I was able to contact him to learn about it. And this is a really, really fundamental thing. Additionally, I think because he's had feedback from me and I was having some problems with it, he's going to be able to make it a better tool. And this is why we see things like, okay, Linux, maybe when it's on my desktop it doesn't look very pretty to you, but when somebody, turns it into Android, it's very pretty, and when somebody turns it into the back end of a website, you don't really have to see the unpretty part of it. It just kind of works. And by having open source things, we have a lot more communication about how things are working, and we have a lot more back and forth between crazy developer people like yourselves about how to make things work better. If I have a small company and I keep all of my cards close to my chest, then nobody's ever going to, tell me what the best hand to play is. So by working on these sort of open tools, we're able to work together better and make things that work better. Now you might say, okay, yeah, Tom, but I want to make $12 million. Where are you going to help me with that? And open tools can be very useful for this as well, and taking the time